Welcome to Heresy, the Horus Heresy talk show. In this video, we're going to be talking about the troop units and dedicated transports for the Mechanicum faction from the new Liber Mechanicum book. We're going to be talking about how to equip them, some thoughts on the units as well, and generally whether the options that are available to Mechanicum we feel are good or not. But before we do that, if you enjoy the content, please do leave me a like and a subscribe, and if you've got any feedback or thoughts at all, please drop them down in the comments below. And now, on with the show. The first unit is the Adsecularis Tech Thrall Covenant. So, in the previous edition of Horus Heresy, these were either zombies, effectively, or they were just people that are being converted into tech thralls, and that's kind of all being mashed into one unit now. They've got a lot less options and ways to use them than they used to have, which is a little bit of a shame in a lot of ways, because they were kind of cool in that they were a very, throwaway unit, but there was lots of ways you could use them. But they are still good despite that. So offensively, just don't bother. They got weapon skill and ballistic skill 2. They've lost the ability to take melee weapons. Their las lock, which is a worse las gun somehow, doesn't do anything, so forget about that. It's, you might occasionally kill a Space Marine. Defensively, they're quite interesting, so they've got toughness 3 and a 6+ save, and they've got heavy. Now, there's not many weapons in the game that don't have an AP, but, occasionally you're going to get to reroll that 6+ save against some odd things, but for the most part, this is just a disadvantage. They've got Feel No Pain 5+. That may seem less good with toughness 3 because, you're not going to get it against strength 6 weapons. But if your opponent's shooting this unit with strength 6 weapons, then you're probably actually reasonably happy that they're not shooting something else. So they have got that Feel No Pain save. Their leadership 6 is the problem. Any kills on these are going to be multiple kills. It's rare your opponent's not going to kill a few of them when he shoots at them. And that's going to force a leadership test. Now, they are stubborn, which is good. But more often than not, if they're forced to take a leadership test, they're going to run away. So these guys are very easy to get rid of. Any way your opponent chooses to get rid of them, if you just want to make them flee, whatever he does, it's pretty easy to kill them. They've also got a rule called Right of Pure Thought, which used to be quite a beneficial thing. Now it just means you can't make reactions or sweep in advance. Well, they weren't going to win a combat anyway, and we probably weren't going to waste reactions on them anyway most of the time, so not a big deal. The reason you take these guys is that they're 45 points for 10 of them, or if you choose to make the unit bigger, which is quite economical, you can get 20 of them for 75 points, which is quite a lot of stuff. They're quite bad value when you compare them to Space Marines like a tactical squad. You think of what a tactical squad does for 100 points, it's got an effective gun, they got a 3+ save. Tactical Space Marines are quite useful, but this isn't the role of this unit. The role of this unit is to be very cheap and do nothing, effectively. So they're going to either screen for things, if your opponent's trying to drop pod assault you, or, you just want your opponent not to be able to charge your stuff. 45 points of stuff that's just going to die is a really useful and potentially very powerful thing to have access to. They are also good just for sitting on objectives, obviously because they're line. They can fill your compulsory troop slots in a much cheaper way than a Space Marine Legion could do with theirs as well. So yes, if they get shot, they're going to die, but the point is really, if your opponent's shooting at them, it means they're not shooting at something else in your army, and it's very rare that your opponent's going to get a great result out of shooting these. Even if he shoots them with a bunch of bolters, a unit of 10 bolters, if they're getting fury, won't kill all of these. Yes, they will probably run away, but if they don't, your opponent still hasn't wiped them out. So they're not trivial to wipe out. They do need a little bit of firepower to get rid of them, and therefore they're a distraction. For 45 points, that's very good. Cheap units in games of Warhammer are generally very powerful, and this is no exception. So there's a lot these bring to the table for their cheapness, and if you do want to make them bigger, although they'll be vulnerable to stubborn, 20 Feel No Pain wounds for 75 points is also quite cheap. So all in all, this is definitely a win, and I think you will see these on the table quite a lot when you're playing against Mechanicum. Then we've got the Thallax cohort. So these are really, in a lot of ways, at least in my opinion, these guys are the tactical squad equivalent for Mechanicum. So these are the sort of cheap and cheerful basic line units. So they're 125 points. You get 3 of them. They're toughness 5. They've only got a 4+ save, but they have got 6+ Feel No Pain as well. And because they're infantry, unlike a lot of units in this army, they can react as well. So they're tough enough for their points. They're tough enough. If your opponent brings a bunch of heavy bolters, if you play against Imperial Fists, you know, that 4+ save is really going to hurt them a lot. But against the great majority of weapons, 4+ and a 6+ feel no pain, toughness 5 is fine. Their main issue defensively is they've only got leadership 7. So if you're taking the default unit of 3, losing one of them is going to force a morale check. And you will pass it on average, and they are stubborn, so you'll be mostly rolling your average. But, you know, you can easily fail that and they can run away. That's a little bit of a problem for them. They're also quite vulnerable to strength 10 weapons. Because they got 3 wounds per model, if your opponent has got a way to instant death these, they could very easily take the whole unit out. You know, if your opponent brings a Vindicator, is a really good example. A Vindicator will just total this unit in one shot, probably. So that's not an ideal situation to be in, but generally they're pretty decent defensively for their points. They've also got an ability called Ginsight, which means you can't set up infiltrators within 24 of them, which is pretty cool if you're playing against infiltrators. They've got a huge advantage though in their mobility. So when they use their jetpacks, their 7-inch move goes to a 13-inch move, and they can move 6 inches after shooting it as well. And then they're also allowed to charge. So potentially this unit can go 19 inches and then charge afterwards as well, and that's really good. You won't be getting the charge bonus of the 13-inch move. You'll lose that bonus after the movement phase, but that's a very, very mobile unit. And just that in itself is very powerful. They also have lightning guns, so their basic mode called Arc Mode is just like 3 shots with Shred, Strength 4, no AP, which isn't very good. But in Strike Mode, it's Strength 7, it's AP 5, but it's got Rend and 4+, and it's got Shred. Now that's a very high quality gunshot, especially from a 125-point unit, and it's capable of hitting vehicles because it's got Rend 4. It's capable of hitting Dreadnoughts, which it's particularly good against because it will generally wound them on a 4, so you'll get that Shred reroll. So anytime it wounds, it's also going to Rend as well. So you can ping a couple of wounds off Dreadnoughts, which is quite a big deal for a line 125-point unit to be able to do. But it's also just, you know, easily capable of killing a couple of Marines as well, particularly if they're high-value Marines, you know, or pinging some wounds off something with a 2+ save, like Terminators, etc. That's pretty good. It's a good gun. It's not an incredible gun, but it's certainly a good gun for the points you're paying for this unit, especially considering it's going to fill your compulsory troop slots as well. The extra gun options are pretty good. So you've got, you know, multi-melter, photon thruster, you've got a few different good things in there, but they're quite expensive, and because the lightning gun is pretty good by default, it's probably not worth adding the extra cost to the unit. Melter bombs option's quite nice though, so rather than, you know, if you're thinking of some anti-tank putting a multi-melter in the unit, you would be better putting melter bombs on the unit. So 15 points to give all 3 of them melter bombs. Remember how fast they are, 19-inch move, and then a charge as well, which is really good. So they can charge, you know, run towards a vehicle, shoot it with the lightning guns, maybe get a hit with their end, maybe a pen if you're lucky, and then they can charge and stick 3 melter bombs on it as well. Doesn't matter that their weapon skill 3, because they're going to hit the vehicles anyway with the melter bombs. So that's pretty good. You know, 140 points, that unit's doing a lot. You know, its only downside is it's a little bit less tougher than you would like for the points cost, but it just does so many things. Alternatively, you can just move them across the battlefield fast and charge them into enemy units that you don't want shooting. You know, if you can manage to get past the Overwatch or draw out the Overwatch, or even just charge into the Overwatch of an enemy heavy support unit, you can pretty much just tie them up, because they're going to struggle to kill these in melee. You can give them chain bayonets, not very effective due to weapon skill 3, you know, they won't pen marine armor. They're pretty, you know, okay, but they're only 2 points a model, there's only 3 models, so they are quite cheap, you can spare the points. Overall, really, really good unit, these. Making units that have got a decent gun and are decently tough, this mobile, is just makes them good. Especially when they're filling one of your troop slots as well. You know, you've got to take something in those slots as well. And if you're getting value out of those units in your compulsory slots, it's a bonus. I really like these. I think they will be the default line. You could take Adsecularis as well, but they'll be the default line because you're going to want a couple of units of these in lots of armies because they just do so much stuff. And a really good thing for Mechanicum that this unit is so good. The Scyllax Guardian Automata Maniple is the next option. So these are line as well. They're heavy, and they've got the support unit trait, so, you know, although they are line, you can't take them as your compulsory troops. Now, their sort of flavour comes from the Guardian rule, so this means that when you've got a character joined to the unit, it can't be shot by things like snipers, you know, your opponent can't allocate the wounds, but if they've not got a character with them, They get -2 move and go to initiative 1. So really, if you're going to be using these, they're there to protect the character. They're reasonably tough for their points. You got 8 wounds, toughness 5, and a 4+ save for 125 points, 120 points. Not brilliant, but not bad either. In terms of weapon options, this isn't really why you take them, and, unsurprisingly, the weapon options are fairly lackluster. 5 points per model, you can give them a rotor cannon or a flamer, which is kind of okay. Not a terrible thing, really. You could give them those, but really, these are probably going to be sitting in the backfield protecting characters if you're going to take them at all, so I'd probably not bother with those things. Their melee weapons as well, unfortunately, are fairly poor. Now, how they're described in the fluff as a sort of whirl and nightmare of death is really cool, but their weapon skill 3, their standard weapons only AP 5 and shred. They do benefit from having rad furnace. Now, if the character that's joining them or something, or, another unit nearby, can benefit from their rad furnace, which makes you +1 to wound, not -1 toughness, unfortunately. That is a kind of cool thing you can get out of these. But if they're fighting themselves, their melee just isn't that good. They can switch into dismember mode, which makes them strength 7 AP 2, which is probably the better option most of the time. Wastes their rad furnace, because you're probably going to be wounding most things on the 2 anyway. It's going to get some hits through, so despite being cumbersome, which makes your weapon skill 1, they do have 3 attacks each, and if you charge, that's 16 attacks for the unit, so you're going to get 2 to 3 hits at strength 7 AP 2. So, not absolutely terrible, not really bad, but for the points you pay for them, they're certainly not a real melee unit in the way, you would pay for something that would be weapon skill 5 with lots of attacks for 140, 150 points if you're in a Space Marine Legion. They are an interesting way to give your character a bodyguard, ultimately, if you've got no other options. So they do that sniper protection thing, and Mechanicum characters can be quite vital to the way the army functions, so there is that. But there's better ways, really. Patra Cybernetica will let you join a unit, just joining any other unit that you can, of which there are a few different ones in the book that your characters can join. Yes, you won't have that bodyguard rule necessarily, but these are very expensive just to gain that. Ultimately, they've got a niche, and it's nice that they're not so expensive as to be unplayable. If you love these models, or if you've got them, you want to use them, you certainly can do something with them. They're just a bit too expensive for what they do outside of that, really. And then we've got the Castellax. Whenever I do multiple slides for a unit in one of these reviews, there's a lot to it, and it's an important unit for the army. So let's have a look at their upgrade options. First of all, so they're toughness 6, strength 7. They went down to weapon skill 3, unfortunately, from Horus Heresy 1, which is, a common theme across this book, which really limits their effectiveness in melee. They got 4 wounds, only 2 attacks base as well. So for upgrade options, Shock Charger gives them AP 3. It's pretty nice versus Marines to have a unit that can just penetrate power armor. They're 3 attacks because they got 2 of these as well. Initiative 3, only weapon skill 3 really limits that effectiveness though, so they will chop up a few Marines in melee, and much faster than the Marines will kill them, probably as well, because they're toughness 6, but it's really not where you want them to be, and enemy decent melee units will take these to bits. So, even though they've got that Shock Charger option, it's not something you really want to play for. The Siege Wrecker is kind of nice, it's strength 10, AP 2, brutal, Wrecker, Sunder. It's a pretty decent weapon, 15 points, but, it's specialist, so they go down to 2 attacks, and again, weapon skill 3. You could maybe add one of these in a cheap unit just to give them some vehicle smashing capability, or maybe occasionally have a go at killing some Terminators, but quite expensive, especially since the Castellax already is. They can use Power Blade Arrays as well. Pretty weak weapon, Power Blade Arrays, really. They breach on a 5. That's pretty much it. They'll have 3 attacks using these. If these were free, I would probably use them over the Shock Chargers, just so they can maybe kill some other stuff, but they cost 5 points. So I'd probably avoid them as well. But if you have got these modelled on units, they're certainly not going to ruin, your options for the unit. I just think I would keep these a bit cheaper, generally. Onto the guns. So they got the Mauler Bolter as default. They're pretty solid. 4 shots, strength 6, and pinning is always a nice thing. And, they're free on the unit as well. So they're not going to kill a lot of stuff. But, they wound on a 2. They've got a decent chance of doing a wound to a unit and forcing it to take a pinning test, which is always a good thing. And because these are toughness 6, if you shoot at something that's got, a poor profile for hurting, The Castellax, if you're shooting at something that's got bolters, or even heavy bolters, something like that, you're not going to take a lot of return fire and you get a chance of pinning them, which is kind of cool. Multi-Melter and Darkfire Cannon are both decent options. They're both very good weapons, but they are expensive. 20 points onto a model that's already, quite expensive, especially when you think that Dreadnoughts get, Gravis Multi-Melters for 5 points with 2 shots. This feels, although that's replacing a weapon, but this does feel a little bit on the expensive side. I don't dislike the Flamer options on these either. If you're going to be using Mauler bolters, so the unit's going to be close-ish range and doesn't mind closing, a Mauler bolter, a couple of Flamers, and the option to maybe just get into combat, tie a unit up and punch things with shock charges is not that terrible. You can replace the bolters in their fists with Maxima bolters, which I would never do because the downgrade in range isn't worth it. Getting some cheap searchlights is nice. And I say cheap because a lot of the time getting access to searchlights in a lot of armies need you to have a specific unit with the searchlight on. These are only 1 point per model, so if you're taking an individual Castellax, 1 point you're getting a searchlight is something I would certainly do. Paragon of Metal is on this unit as well. 35 points to make one of these, precision shots for is really the functionality you take this for. Probably not really worth it. Bit too expensive on the unit. But moving on to thoughts on the unit though. Inevitably you're going to compare these to Dreadnoughts. And for 95 points and what you pay for the weapon options, the fact that they can't react ballistic skill 4, just don't compare them to Dreadnoughts. You're going to be sad. Dreadnoughts are a very, very efficient unit, a little bit too efficient. And these are an inefficient unit. You're just going to be sad if you compare that. So try to put that out of your mind and look at these on their own merits if you want to figure out the ways to use them. They gain line in Legio Cybernetica, or with the Cybernetica High Techno Arcana. Now that's quite a big deal. Having access to Toughness 6, pretty hard to kill line units is, a big deal, especially if you are playing missions with a lot of objectives. As I mentioned, though, not being able to react really does hurt these, and especially if you're using them as a standoff range unit, so like 3 of them with Darkfire Cannons, as a lot of us have got built already. Not being able to react is a real pain for that. And you are going to want to bring a Cybernetica Magus of some kind to probably give them the ability to react, so they don't just get shot off the board, but that pushes their cost up further, which is a bit of a pain. 3+ save on these certainly does feel a little light defensively, when you compare them to Dreadnoughts, but just generally, they're a big tough robot. Yes, they've got strength 6, but the 3+ save feels a little bit light. They do have an Atomantic Deflector, so they've got a 5+ invulnerable, which is great, but the problem with Atomantic Deflectors is if you take these in units, every time one of them dies, it's going to do a strength 8 hit on all the other models in its unit, including any characters that have joined the unit as well, probably. And that's a real big issue. If you take 3 of these, or even, 4, 5, 6 for a big unit, everyone that dies has got a reasonable chance of doing wounds to the other models in the unit. And that means that the unit's going to degrade a lot faster. Now, if you're taking Darkfire Cannons on the unit, which get hot as well, that means that a unit of 3 of these with Darkfire Cannons is just going to blow itself to bits. By the time it's shot a couple of times, every time that unit shoots, it's going to take 1 gets hot wound, probably, and then your opponent shoots it and does more wounds. Your unit's just degrading so fast from your own stuff, and it's already not cheap, and that's a big problem for them. They do get better in a lot of ways, though, from the skew factor, right? Like, skew is when your whole army is doing something similar. It makes your opponent harder, have a tougher time to interact with it. And the big thing these have got going for them is they are troops. They go in your troop slot, you can take lots of them. If they're Cybernetica, they will be line as well, which means that most of your army can be Toughness 6 models. Now, although the models themselves aren't that efficient, when your opponent's only got Toughness 6 things to shoot at, your opponent's shooting is going to be a lot less efficient. They do benefit overall, and some of their drawbacks, like the deflectors, are reduced actually by taking these as individual models. The second model in the unit is 10 points cheaper than the first, but I think if you can take these as individuals, you do get a lot more value out of them. If you imagine an individual model isn't getting hit by other Atomantic Deflectors, and if your opponent shoots at it, he's either got to overkill that one individual Castellax with the big guns that your opponent wants to shoot Castellax with. If you think of a unit of 10 las cannons, or a unit of assault cannons, or whatever the things are that you're shooting Castellax at, a lot of the time your opponent will overkill them with their 4 wounds. But sometimes if you're shooting smaller units at them, like 5 las cannons, you might leave them alive on 1 wound, and then you've got to shoot them again with a whole other unit just to get 1 wound off them. I think these get a lot better when you run them as individuals, and that actually goes for a lot of the weaker models in this book. And of course, when you are playing Cybernetica and you can run these as your compulsory troops as well, you could just fill every troop slot with an individual Castellax, which may seem a little bit cheesy, but this unit is a little bit over-nerfed. So whatever you can do to compensate and bring them back to being a bit good again, I think is worth doing. The summary for these, I think overall, is not a brilliant unit. Too many drawbacks and a little bit too expensive, a little bit over-nerfed from the old versions, because these were very good in the last version of Horus Heresy, but they do get much better in Legio Cybernetica. Just quickly, some builds for these that I like as well. So, as I've mentioned, I do like having multiple individual Castellaxes, and I think then the Darkfire Lancers become better, because I really like blind checks in this army. Now, the whole army has weapon skill 3, but the army does have lots of access to sort of cheap or free power weapon equivalents, and anytime you blind an enemy unit with all the different ways that this army can blind people, you can then suddenly capitalize on those weapon skill 3 models that have got good weapons. So individual Castellaxes with Darkfire Lancers just being a reasonably tough fire support unit that can force blind checks, I think is one way to run them. Even if you just run 1 or 2, as support outside of Cybernetica, just in them troop slots. Also individual Castellax with multi-melters as well. Now, multi-melters are disproportionately good for, an individual gunshot. They can easily just blow up a tank or something like that. So if you want to make use of those multi-melter models you've got, I'm not saying these are fantastic, but the best way to use them, again, still individually, just a little fire support unit that can move around, shoot stuff, and maybe it gets a chance to tie up something in melee at some point that isn't very good at hurting toughness 6 models. If you're going to take these in units, I don't like Darkfire Lancers for obvious reasons, and I think multi-melters are too expensive, but taking 3 of them, or maybe even 2 of them, just with Mauler Bolters, if you're playing Cybernetica, gives you a reasonably cheap line unit that's fairly tough for its cost. And if you are running 3 of them, I think you can possibly add a Siege Wrecker to that unit to give it a little bit more utility, just 1 of them on 1 model. Or giving them Flamers as well is, pretty decent. Like, they get up close. That's quite a lot of low AP volume shots to hit someone with. So I do like those things. But, the overall thing for me on these is taking them in big units is a bit of a liability. Really, that's the thing I'd take away from this when thinking about how you equip and use your Castellax. Then we've got the Triaros Armoured Conveyor, probably one of my votes for most improved unit in the book from Horus Heresy 1. 135 points for an AV-15, at least frontally, transport. Now, when you think how many points Space Marines pay to get an AV-15 transport, or even an AV-15 vehicle of any kind, they pay 50 points just for the flare shield. That's already a bargain. It comes with a shock ram, which is such a cool weapon, such a cool looking vehicle. The concussion rules, the concussive rules, are actually pretty broken in the way they're written in the current book, so they only work in the shooting or assault phases. And they don't even work in Overwatch with things like grav weapons because of the weird way that the rules are written. But if we assume that that is unintentional and an accident, and therefore that the shock ram does in fact have concussive 3 that lasts for the rest of the turn, ramming is really great with this vehicle. It's going to do D6 strength 7 hits and then another D6 strength 10 hits for the ram. That's a lot of free damage, and concuss 3 the enemy unit, which if they fail is another way to put them down to weapon skill 1, so all of your melee units can mop them up afterwards as well. The hardest thing to do with this is not to expose its sides while you're ramming, because its sides are only AV-12. So once it's delivered its cargo, if you go around and start ramming things, it's probably going to be a lot harder to keep alive at that point as well, even though it's done its job. It's got a galvanic traction drive, which lets you reroll dangerous terrain tests like a dozer blade, which is a really nice thing to have on a transport particularly. Comes with a searchlight for free. The disadvantage of a searchlight in night fighting is the enemy army is going to shoot you back when you light something up with your searchlight. But on the upside, this is an AV-15 vehicle, so it probably doesn't care that much. It's also got decent guns as well. It's got 2 Volkite calibers, and it's got a twin-link Mauler Bolter, which has got pinning. That's pretty good weaponry for a cheap transport. You know, it's going to probably make Sutton take a pinning test, and it's going to kill a few troops as well. And this thing's got capacity 22, which means that all your bulky units in your army, all your things at bulky 2, bulky 3, this can fit in good size units of them with characters as well. All in all, a really great package for its point cost. It does what it does well. AV-15 will get your stuff there. As well as that, it does some great stuff afterwards where it's ramming its guns as well. Great package for its point cost. My favourite transport in the game now, easily. So in summary, 2 excellent line choices for their cost in this army. It's got a really cheap unit in the Adsecularis and a really good mobile and utility unit in the Thallax. Just a really good general, troop line unit. The Castellax definitely been nerfed a little bit too much from Horus Heresy 1. You can see where the designers have looked at stuff that was too good last edition and tried to bring it in line and just gone a little bit or maybe a lot too far in this case. But they are playable, and they certainly get more than playable when you run them in Cybernetica, which is the important thing. I don't think you'll see Scyllax very much, but at least they do have usable rules and a very niche if you want to put them on the table. And a dedicated transport in the Triaros certainly is going to make Space Marine Legions jealous, wishing they had such a cheap way to deliver their stuff into combat. The balancing factor for that is Mechanicum don't have any incredible melee units to deliver into combat, so it's not like you can get quite as much use out of it. But all in all, great set of units in the troops and dedicated transports for the Mechanicum. And that's the end of the show. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you enjoyed the run through of those units. If you did, please do leave me a like and a subscribe. And if there's anything you'd like to talk about, drop me a comment down below on YouTube, just there. Thanks very much for listening, guys, and I'll speak to you soon. Bye-bye.